Ethan Carter never thought that the tranquility of his suburban haven would turn into a battlefield against an overreaching power. A decorated military veteran and now a dedicated city official, Ethan had always valued the peace that came with his quiet neighborhood. After years of service and sacrifice, he finally found solace in a modest yet charming home on a tree-lined street, a place he restored with as much care as he poured into his classic car projects. His garage was not just a storage space, but a sanctuary where the hum of engines mingled with memories of his past. The property wasn't merely a structure of wood and stone. It was a symbol of freedom and independence. Ethan had purchased it with hard-earned savings, carefully choosing every detail from the vintage door handle to the hand-painted shutters. Every nail and brushstroke told a story of a man determined to honor his legacy while crafting a future unbound by undue control. However, that very pride soon became a target. Enter Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood's homeowners association. As the HOA president, Karen prided herself on upholding an ideal of uniformity and decorum that left little room for personal expression. With a reputation for being unyielding and snobbish, she had turned what should have been a collaborative community effort into a reign of petty tyranny. Karen's persona radiated entitlement and condescension. Her reputation among the board members and residents alike was that of a figure who wielded authority not as a service to her community, but as a means to impose her own narrow view of propriety. The trouble began one bright autumn morning. Ethan, enjoying a cup of coffee on his lovingly tended porch, was interrupted by a brisk knock on the door. Standing on the welcome mat was Karen herself, clad in a sharply pressed suit and armed with a clipboard full of regulation notes. With a smug smile, she launched into a tirade about the brightness of his decorative porch lights. In her mind, these lights, an innocent nod to modern style, were an abomination, a violation of the neighborhood's outdated aesthetic guidelines. "Ethan," she began, her tone icy yet self-assured, "it has come to our attention that your porch lights are in clear violation of community standards. They disrupt the visual harmony we work so hard to maintain. You must correct this immediately." Ethan, a man used to challenges and bureaucratic nonsense, raised an eyebrow. He had never agreed to any such arbitrary restrictions, and his home was not subject to an overzealous body dictating how to live. "Karen," he replied firmly, "this is my property. I respect my neighbors, but I won't be bullied into changing something that doesn't harm anyone." His voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable note of defiance. As their conversation escalated, Karen's smile faded into a glare. It wasn't just about porch lights, it was about control. Karen saw Ethan's independent streak as a threat to the HOA's authority. In her mind, any deviation from her meticulously crafted standards was an act of rebellion that had to be quashed before it spread like wildfire. The seeds of conflict had been sown that very day, and though it began with a minor infraction, it hinted at far more turbulent times ahead. Neighbors, who had quietly gathered at their windows, watched the exchange with a mix of curiosity and concern. Some admired Ethan's resistance, while others hesitated, wary of the repercussions that might come from defying the HOA. Karen's reputation for swift and ruthless retaliation was well known, and her word alone had forced several residents into acquiescence over the years. That day, as Karen left with a curt, "I expect to see results," Ethan felt an ominous chill. He knew that this confrontation was just the opening salvo in what would soon escalate into a full-blown war between individual rights and an overbearing authority. With the setting sun casting long shadows over his property, he resolved not to be intimidated. Ethan would stand his ground, his home, his rules. And as the first sparks flew, neither the warm glow of his porch lights nor the freedom of his property would ever be the same. The next morning, the consequences of that fateful encounter came crashing down on Ethan. At his front door, a sealed envelope awaited him, its embossed crest unmistakable. He tore it open to reveal a fine, a whopping $750 penalty, for violating community light regulations. The notice was official, filled with legal jargon and warnings of escalating consequences if he did not comply immediately. Karen, standing off to the side, crossed her arms with a look of self-satisfaction that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "The rules apply to everyone, Ethan," she declared, as if reciting a law etched in stone. Ethan's first instinct was to dismiss the fine as an overreach, a shameless extortion attempt by a group that had lost sight of common decency. After all, he was not only a respected city official, but also a firm believer in the rights of property owners. He decided to challenge the fine head-on by filing a formal complaint with a local zoning office. His experience in municipal affairs lent him confidence that the law would side with reason over arbitrary enforcement. However, Karen had other plans. Word of Ethan's defiance spread quickly among the community, and it wasn't long before anonymous complaints began flooding the city's offices. Inspectors, armed with clipboards and a penchant for finding infractions where none existed, began arriving unannounced. Every corner of Ethan's property was scrutinized, from the vibrant hues of his front door to the meticulously trimmed hedges that bordered his driveway. Karen orchestrated the visits with precision, ensuring that any slight deviation from her vision of conformity would be magnified into a violation. During one of these unannounced inspections, Karen's entitlement reached new heights. While Ethan calmly addressed a minor issue with an overgrown rose bush, she hovered like an inquisitive hawk, peppering him with questions. "Do you understand that your actions affect the entire community?" she demanded, her tone laced with condescension. Ethan answered respectfully but firmly, citing local zoning laws and historical precedents that guaranteed his right to maintain his property as he saw fit. Despite his measured responses, Karen's expression betrayed her inner conviction that her rules were infallible. The situation deteriorated further when Karen made an unexpected visit to the city council meeting. With her ever-present clipboard, she presented Ethan as an example of defiant nonconformity, a living testament to the chaos that ensues when one dares challenge the HOA's authority. The room buzzed with murmurs as she recounted every detail of his supposed infractions, her voice rising with self-importance. For Ethan, it was not just an assault on his property rights, but a public shaming that tarnished his reputation among neighbors who had once respected him. Yet, even as Karen celebrated her so-called victory, doubts began to surface among the board members. Whispers of Ethan's impeccable character and the legitimacy of his arguments started circulating. Some questioned whether the fine was a mere pretext to enforce a stricter, more authoritarian regime within the neighborhood. In hushed tones during private meetings, a few board members expressed concern over the legitimacy of Karen's methods. But for now, the majority remained under her spell, clinging to the idea that rules were meant to be followed without question. Ethan, on the other hand, was far from defeated. With each new fine and warning posted on his door, he grew more determined. He spent long nights poring over local laws, researching precedents, and gathering documents that proved the inherent rights of property owners. His conviction was clear. Karen's fines were nothing more than a tool to intimidate and control. And so he began to compile a dossier, a meticulously organized collection of evidence that detailed every instance of HOA overreach, every unfair penalty, and every baseless claim made against him. In the ensuing days, Karen's smug demeanor did little to stifle Ethan's resolve. While she expected full compliance, Ethan's actions hinted at a brewing storm. Every interaction, every public dispute, only further solidified his stance. The fine taped at his door was no longer just a piece of paper. It was the catalyst for a fight that would soon engulf the entire community. The HOA's first power move had been executed with precision, but it had also unwittingly awakened a force that would challenge its authority in ways no one had anticipated. As the days passed, the conflict between Ethan and the HOA escalated beyond a mere dispute over porch lights and fines. It soon became apparent that Karen's tactics were not isolated acts of malice, but part of a broader strategy to consolidate power and intimidate dissenters. With every visit from inspectors and every baseless complaint filed against him, Ethan began noticing disturbing patterns, one that extended far beyond the singular case of his home. Late one night, while reviewing the minutes of a community board meeting, Ethan uncovered alarming discrepancies. Several board members had quietly expressed their doubts about Karen's decisions. A confidential memo, leaked by a sympathetic insider, revealed that Karen had been diverting funds intended for community improvements to pay for her personal luxuries. The document listed extravagant expenses, designer clothes, gourmet lunches, even trips that had nothing to do with neighborhood betterment. For the first time, Ethan saw tangible evidence that Karen's actions were driven not by a desire to uphold community standards, but by greed and a thirst for power. Determined to expose the corruption, Ethan embarked on a meticulous investigation. Over the course of several weeks, he documented every encounter, every fine, and every inspection. He installed discreet cameras around his property, always in public spaces, to capture any suspicious activities. His days were now filled with secret meetings with other residents who, like him, had grown tired of the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. In hushed conversations over coffee and during late-night phone calls, neighbors recounted similar experiences, unjust fines, arbitrary rules, and a growing sense that the HOA's authority was nothing more than a facade. One evening, while reviewing footage from a particularly contentious inspection, Ethan noticed something even more alarming. In a clip recorded from his front yard, a board member, whose face he recognized from previous meetings, was seen deliberately misinterpreting a minor landscaping detail as a violation. The video, although short, was a smoking gun. It captured the moment when the board member, under Karen's directive, faked a citation against a perfectly compliant homeowner. This evidence was the spark that Ethan needed to rally further support. Armed with irrefutable proof of corruption, Ethan began reaching out to trusted members of the community. He carefully compiled a dossier containing financial records, video evidence, and eyewitness accounts. Every piece of evidence painted a damning portrait of an HOA that was exploiting its power for personal gain. In a bold move, Ethan circulated the dossier among several board members who had previously voiced their concerns. Slowly but surely, dissent began to grow within the ranks. Some members, fearing public exposure and legal repercussions, discreetly distanced themselves from Karen's inner circle. Karen, however, was not one to be easily deterred. As word of Ethan's investigation spread, her tactics grew even more aggressive. Determined to silence him, she began using the full force of the HOA's resources. Karen called in inspectors more frequently, citing new violations that seemed to appear overnight. In one particularly brazen act, she threatened Ethan with eviction, claiming that his property, despite all evidence to the contrary, was in constant violation of community standards. The threat was clear: submit to the HOA's rules or lose everything. Yet, every threat only fueled Ethan's resolve. He spent countless hours in his study, poring over legal documents and preparing a comprehensive counterattack. The evidence he collected was overwhelming, and he was methodically preparing to present it to the local authorities. The investigation wasn't just about reclaiming his rights. It was about dismantling a corrupt system that had trampled on the freedoms of every homeowner in the community. As tensions reached a fever pitch, Ethan knew that the next move would be critical. With the support of a few courageous board members and the quiet backing of many disillusioned neighbors, he prepared for a showdown. Karen's reign of arbitrary power had left a bitter taste in the mouths of many, and now was the time for action. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a battle that would not only decide the fate of Ethan's property rights, but would determine the future of the entire community. One cool winter morning, Ethan awoke to find his property in disarray. His driveway, once a pristine pathway leading to his cherished home, was now being partially excavated. Heavy machinery rumbled in the distance, a signal that the HOA had taken yet another extreme step. Karen's explanation was flimsy at best. The HOA was expanding sidewalks to improve community accessibility. In reality, it was an unapproved, aggressive maneuver intended to disrupt Ethan's life and unsettle any notion of his rightful autonomy. Fueled by anger and resolve, Ethan immediately summoned a meeting with his neighbors. At the next HOA assembly, a room already thick with tension and skepticism, he marched to the front, clutching a thick folder of legal documents. The file, painstakingly assembled over weeks of research and covert recording, contained every shred of evidence implicating the HOA in illegal actions. He began his presentation with measured calm, outlining the baseless nature of the current expansion, and then methodically unveiling the evidence of financial misappropriation and fraudulent citations. As Ethan spoke, a heavy silence settled over the room. The board members exchanged anxious glances, while several homeowners visibly shifted in their seats, their faces a mixture of disbelief and relief. It was clear that Ethan's revelation struck a deep chord, a realization that the HOA, once considered the benevolent guardian of community standards, was in fact a vehicle for personal gain and oppressive control. Karen, however, maintained her composure. With eyes narrowed and a voice edged with indignation, she dismissed the evidence as misinterpreted figures and a desperate attempt at defamation. But the damage was done. Public opinion had shifted. In the midst of the meeting, a once silent resident rose to speak, recounting personal grievances and experiences of similar overreach. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement and indignation. It became clear that Ethan's courage had ignited a spark of collective defiance. Some neighbors took to social media and local press, broadcasting the unfolding drama and demanding accountability from an HOA that had long overstepped its bounds. As the confrontation intensified, Karen's response grew more erratic. Not willing to lose face in front of the community, she ordered an immediate towing of Ethan's car, a punitive measure aimed at breaking his spirit. But the move backfired spectacularly. Ethan's car, an heirloom restored with love and dedication, became a symbol of resistance. Neighbors began gathering around his home, many with cameras in hand, capturing every moment of the ongoing drama. The towing truck's engine roared to life only to be met by a chorus of outraged voices demanding that Karen desist in her blatant abuse of power. The incident spurred an emergency town hall meeting convened by several outraged residents. At this meeting, Ethan was invited to speak again, this time in front of local media and city officials. With the file of evidence clutched close to his chest, he reiterated the illegalities and injustices perpetrated by the HOA. His arguments were bolstered by live testimonies from other homeowners and corroborating video footage of unapproved actions, including the incident with the towing truck. As the evidence unfolded on the projector screen, the room's atmosphere shifted from tense uncertainty to resolute determination. In that moment, the true nature of the HOA's overreach was exposed. The community was no longer willing to stand by as their individual rights were trampled under the guise of neighborhood improvement. Karen's once impenetrable aura of authority began to crack. Though she refused to back down publicly, the whispers and disapproving looks directed at her spoke volumes. In an unexpected twist, a couple of board members, previously cowed into silence, began to voice support for Ethan's claims, suggesting that perhaps it was time for a change in leadership. Ethan's strike back was not just a personal victory. It was a turning point for the entire community. The public confrontation had exposed the corruption, shamed the HOA into a corner, and united a fractured neighborhood behind a common cause, the right to live freely on their own property. As Karen fumbled with her responses and the assembled crowd grew increasingly vocal, Ethan felt a surge of vindication. This was more than a battle over a driveway or fines. It was a stand for dignity, fairness, and the sanctity of personal property. Not one to accept defeat, Karen orchestrated one final, desperate gambit. The air grew tense when a rumor began circulating that she was planning to involve the police directly, a move that would shift the dynamics of the entire standoff. Determined to assert her authority at any cost, Karen called the local authorities one chilly afternoon, alleging that Ethan's decorative porch lights were not only a violation of the community's aesthetic guidelines, but also a public disturbance that threatened the safety of the neighborhood. When the police arrived, the situation had already escalated into chaos. Ethan, ever calm and collected, stepped forward wearing his city official badge, a silent yet potent reminder of the law he had sworn to uphold. The officers, familiar with Ethan's reputation for integrity and fairness, listened with growing skepticism as Karen recited her grievances in a raised voice. In a swift, unexpected reversal, the police questioned the legitimacy of her claims. Their presence, which should have bolstered her position, instead highlighted the absurdity of the situation. But Karen was not done yet. In a bid to salvage her crumbling authority, she resorted to even murkier tactics. Late one night, a shadowy figure was spotted near Ethan's garage, a private investigator allegedly hired by Karen, creeping around the property in an attempt to dig up personal dirt on him. Unbeknownst to Karen, Ethan's ever-watchful security cameras had captured the entire incident. The footage was unmistakable. The PI, caught in the act of unauthorized surveillance, was seen rifling through Ethan's belongings and making furtive gestures toward the camera. The next HOA meeting became a stage for public humiliation. With the evidence projected for all to see, Ethan calmly recounted the events of that fateful night. The room, already buzzing with discontent, fell into a stunned silence as Karen's own words failed to explain the glaring footage. "I was merely ensuring compliance," she stammered, but the crowd knew better. The evidence was irrefutable, a clear violation of privacy and a testament to her desperate measures. The humiliation deepened when, in a dramatic turn, another board member came forward. With an air of quiet determination, they revealed that Karen had been involved in falsifying documents to support her baseless claims against Ethan and other residents. These documents, meticulously forged and intended to lend credibility to her fabricated narrative, now lay exposed as evidence of fraud. The revelation sent ripples through the community. If one board member could be compromised by Karen's tactics, how many more had been silently coerced into complicity? In the face of mounting evidence and public outrage, Karen's desperate measures became more erratic. At one point, she attempted to stage another intervention by orchestrating a last-minute police call, this time claiming that Ethan had trespassed on common property in violation of HOA rules. The police, now fully aware of the previous debacle, found themselves in a difficult position. Their reluctance to side with Karen only deepened the community's trust in Ethan's integrity and exposed Karen's tactics for what they truly were: acts of desperation by a leader facing imminent downfall. Ethan, for his part, handled each new assault with unwavering resolve. Every step Karen took to intimidate him only strengthened his resolve to expose the corruption once and for all. His calm demeanor and steadfast commitment to the truth provided a stark contrast to Karen's frantic, increasingly paranoid behavior. In that charged atmosphere, every piece of evidence and every testimonial added weight to Ethan's cause, making it impossible for even the most loyal HOA members to ignore the truth. By the end of the meeting, it was clear to everyone present that Karen had overstepped not only her legal bounds, but also the moral limits of acceptable behavior. Her final, desperate moves, police involvement, unauthorized surveillance, and document forgery, had painted an indelible picture of a woman driven by power and fear rather than justice and community welfare. The assembled crowd, emboldened by Ethan's courage and the undeniable evidence, left the meeting with a sense of resolution that change was not only necessary but inevitable. In the wake of the explosive revelations, the community's response was swift and unrelenting. Neighbors who had long suffered in silence now united, fueled by a shared determination to reclaim their rights and dignity. What began as isolated incidents of intimidation had transformed into a full-blown uprising against the corrupt practices of the HOA. In emergency meetings and impassioned gatherings, residents debated their next steps, and the consensus was clear: Karen's reign had to end. Within days, the neighborhood held a special vote to remove Karen from her position as HOA president. The atmosphere at the meeting was electric, equal parts anger and relief. Homeowners, emboldened by Ethan's revelations and the damning evidence presented in the previous meetings, cast their ballots decisively. When the results were tallied, the margin was overwhelming. Karen was officially voted out, her authority dismantled by a community no longer willing to tolerate tyranny. The fallout was swift. As news of her removal spread, the local authorities launched an investigation into the entire HOA operation. Financial records, once shrouded in secrecy, were scrutinized under the light of public scrutiny. It became evident that Karen had not been acting alone. Systemic corruption had permeated the association. Several board members, previously complicit in her schemes, now faced inquiries of their own. The HOA structure, built on unjust rules and illegal fines, began to crumble from within. For Ethan, the victory was deeply personal. His efforts to stand up against the HOA were vindicated, and the collective uprising of the community served as the ultimate triumph of individual rights over bureaucratic overreach. Neighbors who had once hesitated now approached him with gratitude. Their lives, which had been marred by the constant threat of fines and intimidation, were finally returning to normalcy. In one poignant moment, as Ethan sat on his well-lit porch enjoying a quiet cup of coffee, a young resident approached him with a broad smile and said, "We're free now, thanks to you." Even as Karen's removal marked a turning point, the community's path to healing was just beginning. The local government, alerted by the scandal, imposed strict new regulations to prevent any future abuse of power by neighborhood associations. The once feared HOA was restructured entirely, with transparency and accountability at its core. Ethan, who had inadvertently become the face of this transformation, was later invited to speak at a town hall about the importance of safeguarding homeowners' rights. His words resonated not only with his community, but with other neighborhoods facing similar battles. As the dust settled, it was clear that the downfall of Karen's regime was a victory for everyone. The once oppressive structure that had intimidated so many was now being replaced by a model of fairness and respect. The story of Ethan and his neighbors spread beyond the local community, inspiring other groups to challenge unjust practices in their own regions. And while Karen's removal was met with relief, it also served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that power unchecked can quickly devolve into tyranny. For Ethan, the victory was bittersweet. Though he had won a significant battle, he remained vigilant, knowing that the price of freedom was eternal watchfulness. But for now, as he looked out over his community, a community that had reclaimed its voice, he allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. The light of his porch, once a point of contention, now shone as a beacon of hope and resilience. In the weeks following Karen's removal, legal repercussions for the HOA began to roll in. The city, alarmed by the widespread reports of overreach and corruption, initiated a formal inquiry into the association's operations. Financial audits revealed a trail of misappropriated funds, fraudulent fines, and a complete disregard for the legal protections afforded to homeowners. Not long after, the local government slapped the HOA with a substantial fine and ordered its complete dissolution if it failed to reform its practices. Ethan, now a respected figure within the community, led the charge in helping residents file a class action lawsuit. Together, they built a formidable case against the board members who had, until now, operated in the shadows. The lawsuit detailed every instance of abuse, from unwarranted fines to unlawful surveillance and even forgery. With each new piece of evidence, the legal hammer fell harder on those who had once thought themselves above reproach. The legal process, though slow and painstaking, brought a sense of justice to the community. As courtroom battles unfolded, several board members found themselves facing charges that could permanently bar them from any future role in community management. For Ethan, the legal proceedings were the final, powerful power move, a decisive act that would ensure that no homeowner would ever again have to live under the oppressive thumb of an unaccountable association. The city's intervention, the lawsuit, and the eventual conviction of several corrupt board members together marked the full legal reckoning of the HOA. The entire system, built on the subversion of property rights, was now in ruins, replaced by a framework that promised transparency and fairness for all. As the legal storm continued to batter the remnants of the HOA, Karen's personal life began to unravel in public. Once a figure of unyielding authority, she now found herself the subject of scorn and ridicule. Rumors spread like wildfire. Her lavish spending, her dubious financial practices, and even the circumstances behind her sudden rise to power were all laid bare for the community to see. In a final crushing twist of fate, Karen's personal assets came under scrutiny. Her car, once a symbol of her self-important status, was repossessed due to unpaid debts. In the midst of her mounting legal troubles, her husband, once her staunch ally, filed for divorce, citing her unethical conduct and the public disgrace that had become impossible to ignore. The scandal was complete when she was seen arguing at City Hall, desperately trying to avoid additional fines and legal repercussions. One of the more ironic moments came when a former neighbor, now her social media nemesis, shared a video of Karen being escorted out of her own mansion by bailiffs. The sight of her, once so commanding, reduced to a figure of humiliation, brought home the harsh reality of her downfall. For Ethan and the rest of the community, it was poetic justice incarnate. At a chance encounter, while waiting in line at a local cafe, Ethan saw her, now employed as an assistant property manager for another HOA. With a wry smile, he greeted her with a light, "I hope you enjoy following the rules now," a remark that encapsulated the community's sentiment. Karen's personal and professional life had collapsed into a cautionary tale of greed and tyranny. The once untouchable HOA president was now a shadow of her former self, a living reminder that no matter how high one climbs, unethical behavior always comes with a price. Months later, the neighborhood had transformed into a place of newfound hope and unity. The community, once fractured by fear and authoritarian rule, now thrived on transparency and mutual respect. Ethan's home remained his sanctuary, a beacon of resilience and defiance. The porch lights, which had once been the catalyst for an epic confrontation, now shone proudly as symbols of personal freedom and individuality. Residents gathered frequently, sharing stories of past injustices and celebrating their reclaimed rights. The HOA, reformed under strict new guidelines, served as a reminder that even the most oppressive systems could be overthrown when united by common purpose. At neighborhood barbecues and community meetings, laughter and light-hearted banter replaced whispers of fear. Every so often, someone would jokingly hand Ethan an HOA violation notice, a nod to the absurdity of the past. And with a knowing smirk he would reply, "They really tried," leaving the crowd in stitches. In the quiet moments on his porch, Ethan reflected on the long road that had brought the community to this point. He knew that the battle for justice was never truly over, but for now, the victory was sweet. The scars of the past served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the power of standing up for one's rights. As the sun set over the neighborhood, casting a warm glow on well-tended lawns and smiling faces, the legacy of Karen's tyranny faded into a distant memory. The community had learned a valuable lesson. True freedom was not granted by blind obedience, but earned through courage, persistence, and the collective will to stand together. Fade to black as Ethan's porch light flickers one last time, a final mic drop moment that signifies not just the end of a battle, but the dawn of a brighter future for all.